Welcome to Future Self Dreaming. My name is Carlos Kukulkan. Everything other than working was forbidden. Walking on the streets, having fun, singing, dancing, getting together, everything was forbidden. Now, if that quote included that working was forbidden as well as walking on the streets, having fun, singing, dancing, and getting together, it would better resemble the year 2020 than the George Orwell book 1984 from which the quote is taken. I haven't had much motivation to record presentations for this YouTube channel since the beginning of this year when the scamdemic began, after YouTube banned one of my initial presentations for opposing the government-sanctioned politically correct narrative regarding the current state of fuckery in the world. In Orwell's book 1984, another quote states that who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past. It's a very poignant quote that highlights the ability to influence people's minds by controlling a narrative. And in relation to the digital book burning that we're experiencing more and more by the day through the censorship of the big tech companies, I guess today I wanted to elaborate on a few themes that I've been observing over the past few months that involve synthetic synchronicities, transhumanism, and the rise of the technocratic elite. I had an experience probably over 10 years ago now, whilst visiting my sister's apartment one night, where I was watching a presentation on my computer about future transhumanist agendas. When I finished watching that on my computer, I turned my sister's television on and a show began playing, which was all about transhumanism and featured a man named Ray Kurzweil, who is an advocate for the futurist and transhumanist movements that involve themes of life extension technologies and the future of nanotechnology, robotics, and biotechnology. In the show, he was talking about the concept of an exponential rise in information technology leading to a point known as the singularity, which many people believe may necessitate the need for humans and machines to merge somewhere about the year 2045 or 2049, so as to avoid the extinction of the human race due to a point where technology has become out of control. Now, when I watched this program, I considered that it was an uncanny synchronicity that I'd just watched something being played on a DVD in my computer about transhumanism, and then I turn on the TV to encounter a show about the same theme. It had not been very long before this event when in Australia the television had switched from an analogue to a digital network and people started to use smart technology such as TVs that allowed for a two-way transmission, having the capacity to both receive and transmit a signal. Now, I didn't own a TV at that time, and so using one at my sister's place was a bit of a novelty to me. I couldn't help but wonder at the time if the smart television had been listening to the program that I'd been watching on my computer, but the idea seemed a little preposterous and paranoid to me. About a year later was the next time that I visited and stayed at my sister's apartment, and another strange occurrence happened that evening when a friend texted me and told me there was a TV program that I should turn the television on and watch. So I turned it on and had a Twilight Zone moment when once again I found myself listening to Ray Kurzweil. I found it fascinating that my friend, not knowing anything about the occurrence a year earlier, had texted me to watch something by Ray Kurzweil again as soon as I'd entered my sister's apartment. Now, not long after this, it seemed like it was becoming a common phenomenon for people to begin having advertisements pop up on their computers and phones, not from having searched any of those things online, but from having conversations about such things in the vicinity of their smart devices. Now, some of this phenomena could be explained by understanding how our brains sort for relevant information and the conscious mind begins to notice things that are of interest to us. However, the phenomena seemed to be more than that, and the possibility of mass schizophrenia was diminishing by the moment as many people started to recognize that it was most likely that some form of AI was, in fact, listening to their conversations via these smart devices, and that algorithms had been designed to begin feeding back to them things of interest in the forms of advertising. Now, this phenomena is what I refer to as synthetic synchronicity. I've talked a lot about the concept of synchronicities in previous presentations as being meaningful coincidences where our inner and outer worlds become aligned and there is a pattern recognition and a felt sense experience of interconnectivity of life. The synthetic synchronicities don't have the same felt experience because they are generated by machines rather than encountered, and they have much more of a cold expression to them. Leap to today, and it may be a generally accepted fact for many that our personal technological devices are constantly profiling us and feeding back information to us to influence our decision making. People have become so accustomed to using this technology that we regularly speak with AI, such as Siri or Alexa, for accessing a multitude of information. Meanwhile, the global grid of 5G and satellite networks are making the capacity for constant biometric scanning and a social crediting system of the population a reality. Our addiction to the convenience of this technology is a double-edged sword, largely due to the psychological and behavioural control that it's able to wield over individuals as well as masses. Many of you will be aware of the interesting documentary recently released on Netflix called The Social Dilemma that has begun to highlight many of the addictive elements that have been engineered into social media platforms. This is a frightening social phenomenon of addiction to technology, especially when combined with the ever-increasing personality profiling through the monitoring of our private information, physical movements, payment transactions, and search histories. A brilliant documentary series that looks at the history of manufacturing propaganda campaigns for sales, advertising, and political influence is called The Century of the Self, which I highly recommend watching. It explores the influence of social conditioning designed by Edward Bernays, who was the nephew of the infamous godfather of psychology, Sigmund Freud. Psychological profiling combined with modern technology is now influencing global decision-making in all areas of our lives, politically, economically, in the education sector, and how we relate with one another. All of this leads me to themes that are explored in the most recent third series of the TV series called Westworld. Now, I thoroughly enjoyed the philosophical and existential concepts embedded into the storyline of the first season of Westworld, including the concept of AI robots becoming sentient and self-aware and discovering the dark agendas of the gods who created them. The themes in the third season are a fascinating predictive programming of our current state of affairs on planet Earth. Basically, it's discovered that there is an AI god that is not only programming the robots, but also programming the humans unbeknownst to them, as they think they have free will and are unaware of their programming emanating from the AI godhead. When they begin to become aware that their lives are being run like scripts in a movie, it causes an existential crisis and the breakdown of social structure. Interestingly, in the very last episode, there are riots on the streets and a huge Black Lives Matter communist fist appears painted on the walls of the streets. In a way, Westworld Season 3 may be seen as a predictive programming, conditioning us for the foreshadowing of the times that we're entering involving AI, with the global rollout of the 5G network, including tens of thousands of satellites being launched into orbit by Elon Musk's SpaceX program, establishing the global AI grid more and more by the day. Meanwhile, another of Netflix's predictive programming shows called Altered Carbon also takes a look at the potential for the likes of Elon Musk's Neuralink to be a prototype for having our conscious lives uploaded into a virtual reality more than it currently is, dissociating us further and further from our bodies to the point that uploading our consciousness into another form of body will be a seemingly natural progression. From my perspective, this year we have already entered into World War III, and not many people have yet clocked this fact, largely because we expect wars to involve the invasion of foreign countries with military boots on the ground. Wars are largely fought over the acquisition of natural resources, and even though they may be fought seemingly for other purposes, such as national security or patriotism to a country's political ideology or religion, they're largely fought over natural resources. Well, we're also entering into a spiritual war, where the souls of humans, if you would like, are being hijacked. Perhaps only 5% of wars are ever waged on the physical battlefield. Most of them involve psychological and economic warfare, We now live in a time of global affairs where world wars will not look the same as they have done in previous world wars. And given that the majority of warfare takes place within the psychological and economic arenas, the use of the current AI technology to influence the political and economic decision-making of nation-states is the next frontier of the global battleground. Wars also need enemies, and since the beginning of this scamdemic, we've heard the repeated mantra of the invisible enemy in relation to this supposedly new and deadly virus, an enemy that could re-emerge and mutate at any time and give governments the excuse to lock down and control the population at any moment. The global engineering agendas of the big tech companies to influence decision-making via digital censorship, control of the information flow, have all become ridiculously obvious during this year of Scamdemic 2020. Mainstream media has been controlled for political propaganda purposes for many years, with embedded government agents being at the helm of the major media outlets. The new form of media outlets are those we refer to as social media, sold to us as initially being a means to connect with friends and family. Through these online media platforms, the means of introducing propaganda directed at target populations who have been personality profiled has become more efficient, creating an increasingly polarized political divide and the resultant social upheaval due to the demoralization and eroding of people's trust, which is creating a fertile state for the introduction of the communist New World Order. What does this agenda look like? Well, it seems pretty apparent to me that the agenda is a form of global communism, with the technocratic puppet masters controlling the supply chain to the financial slaves of a manufactured, centralized digital monetary system. Many people who have gone through a spiritual awakening have done so due to events that have thrown them into a spiritual emergency or an existential crisis, and as a result, they may have transitioned through the stages of grief due to their loss, having to shed outdated belief systems and behaviours. I've spoken previously about the stages of grief as we transition to a new reality. In this case, it may be the new normal. For many people, the events that cause this loss, grief and awakening are related to global conspiracy queries questioning the official narrative. As they start to evaluate the politically sanctioned version of such elements, the mounting evidence destroys the official story and people come out of denial to recognise that a much larger nefarious agenda that's dictating many of the elements of their lives is at work. Using the age-old axiom of follow the money, we might begin to learn who or what is controlling us. One of the suggestions that I would give to implement individually and collectively is to take full ownership of our embodied physical state. The physical being is the masterpiece of universal design, and as enticing as it may be to enjoy the benefits that technology can bring, we also need to look at the detriments that may result. And rather than look for another form of religious saviour program in the form of technology, I would suggest that it's wise to connect with the wisdom that your body already has, rather than be further dissociated from the wisdom of your physical being due to fear of bodily disease. Take time to honour and appreciate our bodies and the earth from which your physical being arises. So if you've resonated with any of the information in this presentation and would like to know more, please subscribe. For personal counselling sessions, you can visit the website futureselfdreaming.com. In Lakesh.